It's the moment the world has been dreading for decades. A coordinated strike has successfully decapitated Iran's leadership. Ayatollah Khamenei is gone. The command structure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is in tatters. As you're watching this, global markets are reeling, and the US, Russia, and China are on a collision course. What happens in the next 24 hours could very well decide the fate of the 21st century. Here's what we know so far. This isn't a prediction. It's a breakdown of a hypothetical, yet terrifyingly plausible, chain of events. A single action has lit a fuse running from Tehran through the entire Middle East, all the way to Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. To understand what happens next, we first have to grasp the sheer scale of what just took place. The world as we knew it yesterday is gone. Section 1, the what just happened, the end of an era. Around 6:30 Greenwich Mean Time on February 28, 2026, the long-running shadow war between Iran, Israel, and the United States blew up into open conflict. Explosions hammered the Iranian capital, Tehran, along with key strategic cities like Isfahan, Qom, and Kermanshah. Within minutes, it was obvious this wasn't a limited strike. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the operation and declared a nationwide emergency. This was a decapitation strike. The main target was the office and compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Reports confirmed a direct hit during a high-level meeting. The casualty list is staggering, it's essentially the entire leadership of the Islamic Republic. In one blow, Khamenei was eliminated along with family members at the compound. Also killed were Defense Minister Aziz Nazirzadeh, the commander of the IRGC's ground forces Mohammad Pakpour, the chief of the armed forces Abdolrahim Mousavi, the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council Ali Shamkhani, and the head of the Supreme Leader's military office, Mohammad Shirazi. The Wall Street Journal, citing U.S. officials, reported that over 48 senior leaders were killed in the first hours of the attack. At the same time, the United States, under President Donald Trump's second administration, unleashed a massive campaign codenamed Operation Epic Fury. While Israel hit the leadership, the U.S. had a broader, more absolute goal: to dismantle Iran's entire security apparatus. American assets targeted command and control centers, missile sites, drone factories, radar installations, and naval forces across the country. From his Mar-a-Lago resort, President Trump sent a blunt video message, stating the operation had no end date and was aimed at toppling the regime itself. In a direct appeal to the Iranian people, he declared, "The country will be yours to take." The move was the result of weeks of tight coordination with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had just wrapped up a visit to Washington. The line had been crossed. The regime that defined Iran for nearly half a century was shattered at its peak. Section 2, the immediate chaos, a world on fire. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The chain reaction was instant and global. Before most of the world had even woken up, financial markets were in freefall. The slightest hint of an all-out war in the Persian Gulf, the artery for a huge slice of the world's oil, sent crude prices spiking toward levels not seen in decades. Analysts warned that if traffic through the Strait of Hormuz wasn't restored quickly, oil could soar past $100 a barrel. By Sunday, March 1, traffic through the strait had already slowed to a near standstill, something unheard of in modern history. Diplomatic channels were overloaded. An emergency session of the UN Security Council was called, but it was unclear what it could possibly do. Washington and Jerusalem stood defiant, as capitals from London to Paris to Berlin made frantic calls for de-escalation that everyone knew would be ignored. From Mar-a-Lago, the message was one of grim determination. From Israel, a state of national emergency. Militaries across the globe went on their highest alerts. U.S. carrier strike groups, already in the region, began tightening their cordon. Airspace over Iran, Iraq, and parts of the Gulf was shut down immediately. The world held its breath, waiting for Iran's response. It didn't have to wait long. Around 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, just an hour after the initial strikes were confirmed, what was left of the Iranian command structure began to lash out. The IRGC issued a chilling statement: there would be no red lines. Soon after, the first wave of missiles and drones headed for Israel. Explosions were reported in northern Israel and near the port of Haifa. But that was just the start. Iran's retaliation wasn't just aimed at Israel, it was aimed at America's entire presence in the Middle East. Over the next 48 hours, a shocking 14 U.S. bases were targeted. The list is a map of American power in the region. Facilities in Bahrain, the UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia were all hit. Muwaffaq Sulti Air Base in Jordan, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait all reported impacts. The huge Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, America's largest in the Middle East, was also targeted. A U.S. radar site in Qatar was reportedly hit, and on March 1, the first 3 American troop deaths were confirmed. The war was no longer between Iran and Israel. It was now, without a doubt, a war between Iran and the United States. Section 3, How We Got Here, The Path to War. An event like this doesn't just happen overnight. It's the result of years of rising tensions, failed diplomacy, and a long, bloody shadow war finally exploding into the open. The road to February 28, 2026, was paved with brinkmanship and violence. The direct lead-up was the Israel-Iran War of June 2025. That conflict was itself an escalation. For years, Israel had been sabotaging Iran's nuclear program by hitting facilities and assassinating scientists. But in June 2025, Israel launched open airstrikes against nuclear and missile sites. The U.S., under President Trump, followed with its own strikes, using powerful bunker-buster bombs on the heavily fortified nuclear sites at Fordow and Natanz, as well as the research center at Esfahan. The Pentagon initially assessed that the strikes set Iran's program back by 1 to 2 years, but the White House claimed a more decisive victory. The aftermath of the 2025 war was critical. Iran, feeling the pressure, didn't turn to diplomacy, it accelerated its program. It blocked International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, inspectors from checking its uranium stockpiles, effectively blinding the world to its progress. By the last inspection, Iran was known to have a significant amount of uranium enriched to 60% purity, just a short technical step from weapons grade. It was widely believed that while the facilities were damaged, Iran kept the knowledge to rebuild quickly. At the same time, the regime turned inward, launching a brutal crackdown on domestic protests that had been simmering for years. Reports indicated that tens of thousands of protesters were killed as the state desperately tried to regain control. For Washington and Jerusalem, this painted a dangerous picture: a regime with its back against the wall, brutally suppressing its own people, and marching toward a nuclear weapon while the world couldn't watch. Diplomacy was dead. Talks to revive a nuclear deal had fallen apart during Trump's second term. With Iran's growing missile stockpiles and expanding network of proxies, the strategic thinking in Washington and Jerusalem changed. The shadow war had failed to contain the threat. Sanctions hadn't crippled the regime. The only option left on the table, as they saw it, was the one that was just taken: a direct, overwhelming strike designed not just to delay the nuclear program, but to end the Islamic Republic itself. The final decision was likely made during Netanyahu's visit to Washington in late 2025 or early 2026, where the last pieces of Operation Epic Fury were put into place. Section 4, The Internal Power Vacuum, The Battle for Iran's Soul. With the head of the snake cut off, the body began to thrash. The decapitation of the supreme leader and his inner circle created a power vacuum Iran hasn't seen since the 1979 revolution. The entire system of the Islamic Republic is built on the idea of vilayat-e faqih, or the guardianship of the jurist, which puts ultimate authority in the hands of one senior cleric. With Khamenei gone, that authority is now up for grabs. Constitutionally, there is a process for this. A temporary leadership council, made up of the president, the head of the judiciary, and a jurist from the Guardian Council, is supposed to take over until the 88-member assembly of experts can pick a new leader. Reports immediately suggested that Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and senior figure Ali Larijani were discussing post-Khamenei plans. But this isn't a peaceful, constitutional transition. It's a crisis happening under enemy fire. The Assembly of Experts' ability to even meet was severely limited by the ongoing strikes. In this chaos, three main factions are emerging, each with its own vision for Iran's future. Faction 1, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. The most powerful and dangerous faction is the IRGC. It's more than a military, the IRGC is a state within a state, a massive empire with its own economic holdings, intelligence services, and a fanatical devotion to the revolution. It answers only to the supreme leader. With him gone, the question is, will they answer to anyone? Or will they decide that they, the true guardians of the revolution, should rule directly? The IRGC has the guns, the organization, and a deep distrust of politicians. They might see this as their chance to get rid of the clerical front and set up a military junta, taking control to fight the war against the US and Israel with total ferocity. Their first move, vowing no red lines and launching immediate, widespread retaliatory strikes, points to a hardline, aggressive stance. Faction 2, the political establishment. This group includes the career politicians and clerics who have run the state for decades. Figures like Ali Larijani, a former parliament speaker, and Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the current speaker and a former IRGC commander himself, represent this faction. They are regime insiders, deeply invested in its survival. But they're also pragmatists, at least by the Islamic Republic's standards. Larijani, for example, was key in making the original 2015 nuclear deal. This faction's goal is preservation. They might try to quickly name a successor to maintain the republic's structure. They may even see a path to de-escalation, believing a negotiated settlement is the only way to stop the complete destruction of the state they helped build. However, their power is severely limited by the IRGC, which might see any talk of negotiation as treason. Faction 3, the people of Iran. The third, and most unpredictable, force is the Iranian people. For years, they've protested against the regime, demanding an end to economic hardship, social repression, and corruption. The government's recent brutal crackdown, which killed thousands, has only made them angrier. Now, President Trump's message, "The country will be yours to take," is a direct call for them to rise up. This is both an opportunity and a huge risk. A popular uprising could be the final push that topples the fractured regime. Protesters might see this chaotic moment as their best and last chance to reclaim their country. However, they are unorganized and unarmed, facing factions that have shown they're willing to use deadly force. Both the IRGC and the political establishment could try to co-opt this popular anger, turning it against foreign enemies to unify the nation behind them. Or, more likely, they'd see an uprising as a second front they can't afford and move to crush it even more brutally than before. Section 5, the regional tinderbox, the shattering of the Axis. Iran's power in the Middle East has never been just about its own military. Its real strength is its axis of resistance, a network of proxy groups and allied militias that stretches from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Peninsula. This network lets Tehran project power, threaten its enemies, and wage war without using its own soldiers. With the central command in Tehran gone, the big question is, what does this network do now? Does it fall apart, or does it erupt in a frenzy of uncoordinated violence? The IRGC's Quds Force, the unit that manages this network, was the glue holding it all together, providing money, training, and advanced weapons. The initial strikes have no doubt hurt the Quds Force's ability to coordinate a response. However, these proxy groups aren't just puppets, they are independent groups with their own goals and abilities. Hezbollah's dilemma. As we've seen, the IRGC's first reaction was to strike back directly. But the world's eyes immediately turned to Lebanon and to Hezbollah. As the crown jewel of Iran's proxy network, Hezbollah is the most powerful non-state actor in the world. With an estimated arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and missiles, including precision-guided ones that can hit specific targets anywhere in Israel, Hezbollah has the power to start a truly devastating war. Hezbollah now faces a terrible choice. A full-scale attack on Israel would serve its purpose and be the ultimate revenge for its patrons in Iran. But it would also bring a catastrophic Israeli response that could destroy Lebanon and cripple Hezbollah for a generation. On the other hand, if Hezbollah does nothing, it risks looking weak and abandoning its allies, which could fracture the axis of resistance and weaken its own position. The Iraqi, Syrian, and Yemeni fronts. The chaos spreads outward. In Iraq, powerful Shia militias, part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, have long been supported by Iran. Almost immediately, they started their own attacks, targeting U.S. forces at bases like Ain al-Assad. This turns Iraq into another active war front, threatening to plunge the country back into chaos. In Syria, where Iran and its proxies saved Bashar al-Assad's regime, the situation is just as dangerous. U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Iranian assets there could upset the delicate balance of power, possibly restarting the Syrian civil war. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the Houthi movement has already shown it can disrupt global trade by attacking ships in the Red Sea. Armed by Iran with anti-ship missiles and long-range drones, they now have U.S. naval assets, like the USS Abraham Lincoln, in their sights. Following the strikes on Iran, the Houthis immediately ramped up their campaign, being blamed for strikes on U.S. and UK-owned oil tankers in the Gulf of Aden and the Strait of Hormuz itself. The Gulf states' nightmare. For the Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, this is their worst nightmare. For years, they've been in a cold war with Iran. Now, they are caught in the crossfire of a hot one. U.S. bases on their soil are being hit by Iranian missiles. The radar site hit in Qatar and the bases struck in Bahrain and the UAE aren't just attacks on America, they are attacks on the sovereignty of those nations, dragging them directly into the conflict. These monarchies, which depend on Western security and stable energy markets, are now facing direct military threats from a wounded and cornered Iran. Section 6, The Great Game, the Superpower Collision Course. The strike on Tehran doesn't just redraw the map of the Middle East, it forces a hard reset on the global stage. The strategic plans of the world's three great powers, the United States, Russia, and China, are now in overdrive. How they react could either contain the conflict or expand it into a true global showdown. America's endgame, a high-stakes gamble. For the Trump administration, Operation Epic Fury is the ultimate gamble. The stated goal is regime change, but what does victory actually look like? The best-case scenario for Washington is that the Islamic Republic quickly implodes, followed by the rise of a new, friendlier government that dismantles the nuclear program and ends support for regional proxies. The U.S. would claim a historic victory and reshape the Middle East. But the risks are huge. The call for a popular uprising might not work. The conflict could turn into a bloody, long-term insurgency with American casualties rising. There's a real danger of mission creep, where a limited operation turns into a full-scale occupation, something the American public doesn't want. The U.S. has declared its goal is to topple the government, a maximalist position that leaves very little room for a diplomatic way out. Russia's calculation, opportunity and danger. For Vladimir Putin's Russia, this crisis is a mix of opportunity and danger. Russia and Iran have a close strategic partnership, united against U.S. influence. They are military allies in Syria, and Iran has supplied Russia with drones for its war in Ukraine. A 20-year strategic partnership treaty was even signed in early 2025. However, this is an alliance of convenience, not a formal defense pact. When the U.S. and Israel struck Iran in 2025, Putin made it clear that Iran hadn't asked for military aid. Russia's main interest is regional stability, on its own terms, and undermining American power. A chaotic war in the Middle East could drive up oil prices, helping the Russian economy, but it could also create unpredictable instability on its southern border. Moscow will likely play both sides. It will condemn the U.S. and Israeli aggression at the UN and offer diplomatic support to whoever takes over in Tehran. It might even secretly supply military tech to bleed American forces. But it's highly unlikely to intervene directly and risk a war with the United States. Putin's main focus is still Ukraine, and he can't afford to open another major front. China's nightmare scenario, stability destroyed. For Beijing, this scenario is a complete disaster. China's foreign policy is built on stability, which it needs for its global economic plans, like the Belt and Road Initiative. This war is the exact opposite of stability. Iran is a key part of China's grand strategy. In 2021, the two nations signed a 25-year cooperation deal, where China promised to invest up to $400 billion in Iran's economy for a steady, discounted supply of oil. This deal was Iran's economic lifeline against U.S. sanctions and a cornerstone of China's energy security. Now, that whole strategy is at risk. The Strait of Hormuz, where a massive amount of China's energy imports pass, is a war zone. In 2024, an estimated 84% of crude oil going through the strait was headed for Asian markets, with China as a top customer. A long closure would be devastating to the Chinese economy. China's response will be extremely cautious. It has no interest in a military fight with the United States. Its official statements will call for restraint on all sides. Behind the scenes, its diplomats will be working frantically to protect Chinese assets in Iran and find other energy sources. This crisis brutally exposes how vulnerable China's reliance on unstable regions for its resources really is. Section 7. The unraveling 3 futures for a world on the brink. The initial shock of the strikes has passed. The world is now on a knife's edge, staring into a deep, uncertain abyss. From here, we're looking at 3 broad potential futures, each with huge consequences for the Middle East and the world. Scenario 1, the swift collapse, the best-case gamble. This is the future the planners of Operation Epic Fury are hoping for. In this scenario, the decapitation strike works perfectly. The IRGC, without its top command, breaks into competing factions. The political establishment, seeing the writing on the wall, looks for a way out. Most importantly, the Iranian people, fired up by the regime's weakness and encouraged by the US, rise up in a massive, coordinated movement. The security forces, demoralized and without clear leaders, either step aside or join the protesters. Within weeks, the Islamic Republic collapses from the inside. A provisional, pro-Western government takes power, sues for peace, and agrees to give up the nuclear program and its regional proxies in exchange for lifted sanctions and international aid. The US and Israel declare a huge victory. While this is the most optimistic outcome from a Western point of view, it's also seen as the least likely. Scenario 2, the long war, the quagmire. This is the nightmare scenario. Instead of causing a collapse, the decapitation strike unites the remaining hardliners. The IRGC, maybe under a new, ruthless commander, consolidates power, gets rid of any moderates, and rallies much of the population around an anti-American banner. The extremists win the battle for Iran's soul. What comes next is a brutal, long war. Iran, knowing it can't beat the US conventionally, focuses on its asymmetric strengths. Hezbollah unleashes its full rocket arsenal on Israel, starting a devastating war. Shia militias in Iraq ramp up their attacks, making U.S. positions there impossible to hold. The Houthis effectively shut down the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz to all Western shipping. The conflict spreads. This is the Syria or Afghanistan scenario on a much larger and more dangerous scale. Scenario 3, the fractured state, the Syrianization of Iran. This may be the most complex and tragically realistic outcome. The regime doesn't collapse, but it also can't pull itself together. Instead, Iran shatters. The central government loses authority, and the country breaks apart into competing territories. Different IRGC commanders, controlling different regions, become warlords. Ethnic minorities, like the Kurds in the northwest and the Baloch in the southeast, could try to declare independence. Tehran becomes a contested city, with brutal street-to-street fighting between factions. This creates a Syria on steroids catastrophe. A nation of over 80 million people falls into a multi-sided civil war, causing a massive humanitarian disaster and a breeding ground for extremist groups. The nuclear materials, including the known stockpile of highly enriched uranium, become the ultimate prize for warring factions, a terrifying loose nuke scenario. Iran's neighbors, including Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, get pulled in, backing different sides to protect their own interests, turning Iran into a massive proxy battleground. Section 8. What it means for you, the global fallout. It's easy to think of a conflict like this as something distant, happening over there. But a fire in the heart of the world's energy supply sends a shockwave that reaches every corner of the globe. The most immediate impact is on the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just another shipping lane, it's the world's most critical oil choke point. Between 20% and 30% of the world's seaborne oil and about 20% of its liquefied natural gas pass through this narrow waterway. With Iran attacking tankers and insurers pulling their coverage, this vital artery is effectively closed. The consequence is a certainty, a dramatic and lasting spike in energy prices. The cost of gas at the pump will rise significantly. The cost of heating homes will go up. But the impact goes far beyond that. Higher energy costs mean higher transportation costs for every product on the planet. This feeds directly into inflation, driving up the price of groceries, consumer goods, and everything else. The economic turmoil from this conflict will be felt in the wallet of every person in every nation. Beyond the economy, this event sets a terrifying new precedent. The deliberate, targeted elimination of the entire leadership of a sovereign nation by its enemies shatters post-World War II norms. It moves the world into an era where decapitation is seen as a viable political tool, making diplomacy harder and conflict more likely. Leaders of any nation at odds with a major power will now have to wonder if they could be next. It's a fundamental change in the rules of the game, making the world a much more dangerous place. Conclusion. The coordinated strikes on Iran have done more than just eliminate a leader, they've shattered a decades-old geopolitical balance. The world has been thrown into a crisis with no clear outcome, only a series of terrifying possibilities. The future now hangs on a few critical, unanswerable questions. Inside Iran, will the hardline IRGC consolidate power for a war of revenge? Will a more pragmatic faction find a way to de-escalate? Or will the Iranian people rise up and claim a new future for themselves? Regionally, will Hezbollah unleash its arsenal and trigger a massive war with Israel? And globally, will Russia and China see this as a chance to challenge American power, or will they push all sides to step back from the brink? We are in uncharted territory. The established order has been broken. What has happened can't be undone. The world of yesterday is gone. The question now isn't if the world has changed, but what it will become. The next few days and weeks will give us the first, frightening answers. CTA. This situation is changing by the hour. To stay updated with in-depth analysis as these events unfold, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. The geopolitical landscape is being redrawn right before our eyes, and understanding the forces at play has never been more critical. If you're finding this deep dive into the US-Israel-Iran war and its global ripples valuable, hit that like button to show your support. It really helps Atlas Affairs reach more people hungry for unfiltered geopolitics. Subscribe if you haven't already, tap the bell icon, and select all so you never miss our next breakdown on world affairs, whether it's Middle East flashpoints, great power showdowns, or market shocks. Follow us for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay ahead.